They say when it rains, it pours. And that is the situation for Nvidia right now. DeepSeek just launched DeepSeek Math V2, which is an expert at math reasoning. And it performs nearly at the same level as Gemini 3 Pro and Claude Opus 4.5 when it comes to math reasoning. And it was trained using Nvidia's H800 GPUs, which were launched about 3 years ago and are one generation older than the GPUs that Nvidia sells at premium in the US. Most of us don't really spend much time thinking about or trying to understand how these Chinese models pull off such incredible feats without access to these cutting-edge Nvidia GPUs. In this video, we will deep dive into the world of DeepSeek. First, let's talk about the math expert. This DeepSeek Math V2 model is an expert model built on DeepSeek's workhorse model, DeepSeek V3.2, a mixture of experts generalist model. I'll talk about what mixture of experts mean in the coming slides as we deep dive into this DeepSeek's innovation approaches. The unique technical challenge that they have introduced in this DeepSeek math model is that they have introduced a verifier at the time of inference. What this inference verifier stage does is that when an answer is drafted by the generator, the verifier verifies the answer, double checks it, and then if the answer is incorrect, it sends it back to the generator. So it kind of self-corrects. There is a self-correction loop created here, and the answer that comes out is rigorously checked for logic and accuracy. Because of this math expert model has been able to perform at gold medal level in international and Chinese math Olympiads. This is a performance at the same level as Gemini 3. This model could potentially be a great choice for pure mathematicians and for, specifically for tasks that require step-by-step logical derivation. And this is an open source model. Like all other DeepSeek models, this V2 math model is available on Hugging Face for download as we speak, and anyone could download it from there and use it in their infrastructure for free. And of course, there is DeepSeek's chatbot where you can choose this model and chat with, right? Now, what is the secret behind these low-cost DeepSeek models? If we think that DeepSeek is able to create low-cost models because they use older version of GPUs, that is only partly true. The reality is having to use these older version of GPUs actually forces them to innovate and come up with unique methods for training and post-training, which could become a gold standard for the industry. There are 4 innovation methods that these models use that we know of. Firstly, the architecture itself, the mixture of experts architecture. The V3.2 model has 671 billion parameters in total, but it has multiple experts stitched together. Having these multiple experts together means that they can train these experts individually and only call the specific expert at the time of inference, rather than referencing all the 601 billion parameters for each token generation. With this method, although DeepSeek's models have hundreds of billions parameters, they only use 37 billion active parameters per token generated. This makes these models faster and cheaper to run. Secondly, DeepSeek's sparse attention mechanism pre-identifies the keywords that it needs to pay attention to. So it does fewer calculations during inference, which means it's faster and cheaper. And thirdly, it uses FP8 quantization. Now, which is basically using 8-bit numbers instead of 16-bit numbers. It could reduce accuracy, but that seems sufficient because 8-bit numbers allows them for calculations by having the memory usage, so they could use the older version of GPUs which have higher bandwidth memory and allows for higher processing speed overall. And finally, these models use multi-token prediction. For example, if it is writing a code in Java, it knows when there is an if statement that it needs to generate, then it knows that there is a curly brace coming. So it generates that curly brace anyways, along with the if token. So that again makes these models faster and cheaper. It doesn't have to do all that computation in order to generate that curly brace. Now, let us take an example and walk through how this works. Let us say the question asked is, how do I write a Python function to calculate a factorial? There is a mixture of experts router that acts like a gatekeeper before the query actually gets passed to the experts and decides which expert to call, right? So naturally, looking at this question, you would want to call a coding expert and then maybe a writing expert to actually format it in the way that the user is asking, which I would imagine gets called for pretty much every query. The coding expert uses DeepSeek's sparse attention mechanism and pays attention only to the keywords Python and factorial and generates that code, which is sufficient to generate the code and complete the task. All of this is done with 8-bit numbers, that is FP8 quantization. Instead of using the entire model, only the right experts are activated for specific parts of the request, and this mixture of expert architecture saves significant time and computational energy. Now let us take a look at where DeepSeek models are in terms of different benchmarks compared to cutting-edge models such as Gemini 3 Pro. DeepSeek 3.2 is absolutely the cheapest model. It just costs about 20% of GPT 5.1, and GPT 5.1 is the cheapest option that we can compare with. At the same time, if you look at math, science, and coding, it's not as good as these current generation models, but they're good enough. In case of math, it beats pretty much it's on par with GPT 5.1 and Opus 4.5. Science is nearly 80%. Coding, it's not great at coding, but it's a great value for money. Now, you might wonder, why aren't Google and OpenAI just copying this model and making cheaper models, right? Now, here's what I think. These companies in the US are pushing their models towards AGI, artificial general intelligence, while DeepSeek's techniques are really about managing around the unavailability of latest Nvidia chips and challenging the dominance of these Western models. That is why they're making it available for cheap as open source and for people to download and use it. So it becomes an alternative, but they have done a phenomenal job at it. Just imagine how cheap these models would be for a cash-constrained startup building an LLM-based application. They would totally jump on it. Some of these techniques that DeepSeek uses will be adopted by the US models as well in the future, for sure, if the Nvidia tax keeps going up. Quantization is definitely happening already. And the reasoning first approach was first popularized by DeepSeek R1. And most models in the US follow that. So, like they say, necessity is the mother of inventions. Please leave your comments, your thoughts on these Chinese models, their approaches, and what this means to NVIDIA's GPU dominance. See you again.